Welcome to the Economy Magazine here at I-24 News. I'm Natalie Ehrlich here with a daily view of the world's most fascinating stories in business and innovation. Coming up, tourism in Tunisia under threat as Islamist extremism grows. And oil drilling kicks off in the Arctic, but not without the critics. But let's first start now with the headlines. Greece in focus on Wednesday as the Greek Prime Minister travels to Brussels to hear out Europe's plan to solve its debt crisis. Aiming to break a months-long impasse in negotiations, European creditors will outline the economic reforms needed if Greece is to receive further funding. Well, fiscal austerity and pension overhauls are likely to be the bitter pill for Greece, but its new leftist government won't accept easily. Still, the deadline for extending its bailout is fast approaching at the end of the month, and Athens may have no other choice but to accept the terms if it doesn't want to leave the euro bloc. Markets are also worried about Greece, the uncertainty weighing now on Asian stocks at the open Wednesday. The Greek drama is expected to continue being a drag on global markets until a solution, or at least a temporary one, is finalized. Well, the latest setback drove bond prices down in Europe and the United States on Tuesday, as debt investors also struggle with concerns about deflation. Well, Germany's jobless rate fell by 6,000 to 2.78 million, another sign of strength for the European powerhouse. A recent survey showed Germans are more optimistic than at any time since October 2001, propping up Europe's largest economy even more than exports. Berlin now hopes that household spending will help the economy grow by 1.8% this year, though some analysts at Deutsche Bank are not as bullish. Well, moving now to the U.S., Walmart is expected to raise minimum wages for more than 100,000 U.S. employees this July, the firm's second wage hike this year. Walmart is the largest employer in the United States with a workforce of some 1.3 million. Labor groups, though, have long criticized the big box retailer for keeping wages low. Back in February, Walmart said it would raise minimum wages for 500,000 U.S. employees, following a similar trend among other companies like McDonald's and Target, who are trying to retain workers. And Pinterest is reportedly adding a buy button, effectively transforming the app into a shop. Instead of just browsing Pinterest's 50 billion images, a buyable pin will enable users to make purchases too. The move is an answer to Pinterest fans who have long complained about not being able to get a hold of the products featured on its platforms. Tourism in Tunisia. During the summer months, the sector generates close to 70% of the country's annual revenues. But the threat of Islamist violence poses a major threat.
Jerba, right off the south coast of Tunisia. This holiday island used to be a magnet for tourists from all over Europe. But that was before jihadist gunmen burst into the Bardo National Museum in Tunis on March 18th and killed 22 people, nearly all of them foreign tourists. Adel Taris owns a hotel here, and his season is not looking good. He just lost a $1.5 million contract.
On a signé un contrat avec un tuyau italien.
We signed a contract with an Italian tour operator for 170 rooms. We were set for a perfect season, so we started recruiting personnel and made some investments. Then right after the attack, the contract was cancelled.
Et juste après l'attentat, on a eu de résiliation de contrat.
Tourism accounts for 7% of Tunisia's GDP and almost 400,000 direct and indirect jobs. Security has been stepped up for the summer season, and authorities repeatedly insist the country is safe. They've launched a campaign to convince tourists not to miss out on Tunisia's historic and cultural riches. But shop owners in Jerba's souks are hunkering down for a rough year.
This year we feel like the tourism season is a little slower to start. It's not the same. Usually in March things started to move, but this year the season is slow to start.
The tourism sector generates nearly 70% of its annual revenues during the summer. It has already been rattled by political instability and rising Islamist violence since the revolution that toppled former President Ben Ali in 2011. In Jerba alone, around 30 hotels have closed down since.
We hope
that in 2015 we won't have more than a 5% decline in revenue compared to last year, which was already bad. That would at least give us some hope to keep going for the next few years. I don't think we should talk about this year or even next year. Instead, we need to find a strategy to improve the situation.
4 years after the revolution, the sector is still trailing far behind its 2010 numbers, and professionals are calling for more state support to save the industry.
Expanding on Tunisia, we are joined in studio by our very own Ayman Siksek for Financial Bazaar. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Natalie.
So speaking on Tunisia, it is largely seen as the only success story of the Arab Spring, but apparently the U.S. is trying to keep it that way now.
Absolutely. So since the Arab Spring in 2011, the U.S. has had a keen interest in keeping Tunisia sustainable, very, very stable as much as it can. And Barack Obama, the President of the United States, just recently designated Tunisia a non-NATO ally of the U.S. This is very good news for Tunisia. Now, in 2012, a year after the launch of the Arab Spring, Tunisia received $189 million in aid from the U.S., and in 2015 they only asked for $66 million. Now, many are seeing this as an improvement in their economic situation if they're not in need of as much money anymore 3 years later, but the U.S. actually pledged to triple this amount and give them over $130 million in 2015, and more money in military and security arrangements. So the U.S. really has a big, big interest in keeping Tunisia as stable as possible right now.
And democratic. Continuing with this subject, though, the World Bank, a branch of it, the IFC, is apparently also supporting Tunisia as well. You have a story on that?
That's right. The CAFAC, which is an organization that helps many, many job owners and organizations around the world, especially in embattled countries like Tunisia, train their employees so they're employable in new job opportunities that come up in these countries, has partnered with a bank in Tunisia to help train Tunisians, young Tunisians especially, who are suffering from vast amounts of unemployment right now. And this is partly why Tunisia is in need of U.S. money. So they want to train these young job seekers to be able to keep up with the new demands of the job market in Tunisia, because it is expanding. But what we're seeing right now is that the job seekers are no longer compatible with what the new jobs have to offer. So the CAFAC is trying to change that. Indeed. For the better.
Well, what about Russia? Apparently they're also involved in this.
Right. Well, you know, anytime Russia gets involved, it means business. So Russia is cooperating with Tunisia on nuclear power, of course, and they're trying to cooperate in establishing a new nuclear plant in Tunisia, creating nuclear opportunities there, and they're going to help Tunisia in managing nuclear waste and training people in order for them to be able to work at the center. And for Russia, this is exciting news. We know that Russia has certain associations with Iran in this respect, and this is an alliance between Russia and Tunisia, which some would say is not very predictable. You wouldn't think the next choice for Russia would be Tunisia, of all places, but it is
surprising, actually.
Yeah, it only points to Russia being interested in the Middle East in a very, very deep and interesting way. Probably more news on that to come.
Well, thank you so much. Russia, as we know, has been cozying up to Egypt, so now we can see that they're also in line with Tunisia. Thank you very much, Ayman Siksek. We do appreciate it.
Thank you, Natalie.
Well, moving on now with the rest of our coverage, oil giant Shell starts drilling in the Arctic thanks to approval by U.S. President Barack Obama. Now, while some insist that this move is essential for jobs, as well as the broader U.S. economy, environmentalists strongly oppose this development.
An oil rig arrives in Seattle, Washington, after President Obama's announcement giving permission to oil giant Shell to begin drilling in the Arctic. Shell is now rushing to get its fleet to the north so they can begin drilling once the ice recedes. According to industry leaders, the region's resources are essential for business, consumers, and employment.
It isn't just the jobs that we're talking about in terms of the maritime jobs. It's our entire economy is still at a point in its development where we're enormously dependent upon fossil fuels, and we could all wish that wasn't so.
Shell's Polar Pioneer cost an estimated $500,000 a day to run. The company plans to deploy a second rig in the Arctic this summer as well. As the oil rig is brought to Seattle, not everyone is pleased with its arrival.
We're outraged that the Port Commission granted a lease for Shell to park its oil rigs here. But principally, we don't want it to go up to the Arctic. So we're going to draw a line of resistance to prevent it from doing so.
Environmental activists gathered to show their disapproval and concern over Arctic drilling. As the oil rig crossed the Pacific, Greenpeace activists climbed aboard. The NGO is protesting for Shell to stop drilling for oil off the Alaskan coast.
We need to keep all of Arctic oil in the ground if we have any hope of averting the worst effects of climate change. We already have access to more oil than we can afford to burn at this point in time.
In the wake of tragedy in the Gulf of Mexico, protesters are apprehensive about environmental impacts. Activists are citing a poor recovery from the Gulf spill and have concerns on how it would be handled in the Arctic if disaster were to strike again. Shell says the company has revised its safety plans after one of their rigs ran aground 3 years ago. As the deadline for the Polar Pioneer to leave for Alaska approaches, the battleground over Arctic drilling will continue to intensify.
And for the news stories we didn't want you to miss, we are joined in studio by Daniel Roth. Well, firstly, today we have a story about climate change being devastating for poor countries, right?
Absolutely. So, you know, the VTR that we just saw, the video we just saw, really highlights one of the pieces, which is the danger of drilling, the kind of cleanup that it requires. What's happening in India, though, is kind of the other half of it, which is that climate change is causing extreme weather events. One 2013 study found that we're 10 times more likely now than in previous decades to experience extreme weather events. India is experiencing a major heat wave. 2,300 people have died, and there's a lot of evidence that's pointing to this being climate change related.
It is one of the worst disasters of its kind in India's history, correct?
It's one of the worst disasters of its kind in India's history, and it's the 5th deadliest heat wave in recorded history globally.
Wow.
So one of the interesting pieces of this story, though, is that the new-ish Prime Minister Narendra Modi has basically not been talking about the environment, has been almost entirely solely talking about economic growth without talking about the environment. There are some minor projects happening, popping up around the country, but by and large, the direction of India is towards infrastructure growth, economic growth, and not taking into account the kind of environmental impact that this can have.
Certainly with such an impressive GDP that we just saw in the first quarter at 7.5%, even surpassing China's 7%, that is a focal point of pride for him. So it should be interesting, though, at what point will he actually look at the impact that climate change has on his population.
Absolutely, and you know, this is actually a great segue into the foreign policy piece, the next story that we're going to talk about, which is this proposal that you're starting to see bubble up around the world for a post-GDP scale of economics. So interestingly enough, you mentioned that India has surpassed China in terms of GDP growth. China actually in 2013 declared that they would no longer use that as their central indicator for success. There's a lot of proposals now looking for sustainable development growth as a marker. So this takes into account everything from education and social well-being to the environment, the kind of health impacts and environmental impacts and safety, dangerous climate conditions like we're seeing in India. How is economic growth related to all of these things that traditionally, at least in the last 100 years, we haven't associated with economics as we've thrust GDP to the top of the heap?
So you're saying that China is actually interested in climate?
Well, China is in part interested in climate. China's government is interested in having their people, their country, live well. You can see that the middle class is growing. You can see that that when they want to portray a clean environment. They get everyone to stop driving. So it's a question, on one hand, of what's actually happening, and there's a stack of evidence that says that we're not talking about a government that's always got the best interests of the populace in mind, but they do, because they're non-democratic, they do have this interesting power to make snap decisions about whether they want to try something new with sustainability.
Well, at least as long as it looks good on paper and looks good for investors, China's pretty much willing to do that, I'm sure.
This is exactly what it seems to be.
Or at least compete better with India.
Yeah.
Well, that does look like it wraps up our coverage today. Do join us for all the latest economic coverage tomorrow. Do stay tuned for all our latest also on our website. It's i24news.tv. We're broadcasting live from the Jaffa Port in Tel Aviv. I'm Natalie Ehrlich. Thank you very much for watching.